Who Will Be King? By Katie Dale and Letizia Rizzo. Once upon a time, there lived an old king who faced a difficult problem. Who should be the next king? Usually the crown went to the king's oldest son, but his sons were triplets. They were all exactly the same age. There was strong Edmund, clever Crispin, and gentle Jack. The king thought for a while. Then he smiled. "I know," he said, "I'll set 3 tests to see who will make the best king." The first test was to see who could make Sir Gallant drop his sword. Edmund disarmed the knight with a single swing of his heavy sword. Crispin wasn't as strong, but he was cunning. He tripped Sir Gallant and stole his sword. Jack wasn't strong or cunning. He fought bravely, but was soon knocked right off his feet into a market stall. "Jack will never be king," laughed his brothers. "I'm so sorry," Jack said to the merchant. He dropped his sword with a clatter and began to tidy up. "I'll pay for everything," he said. The merchant smiled. "Thank you, Jack. You're very kind." In the second test, the brothers had to shoot an apple off a servant girl's head. She looked very frightened. Clever Crispin shot the apple clean off and grinned smugly. Edmund wasn't as skillful. His arrow whizzed past the girl's ear, making her jump. The apple rolled off her head. "I did it!" Edmund cheered, jumping for joy. When it was Jack's turn, he walked over to the girl and took the apple off her head. His brothers laughed. "Jack will never be king," they said together. "Here," Jack said, giving the girl the apple to eat. "We shouldn't waste food when people are hungry. And we shouldn't put people in danger." "Thank you, Jack," the girl's mother said. "You are very wise." The last test was to see who was the cleverest. "I won the first test and you won the second." "Crispin!" Edmund cried. "After this test, one of us 2 will be crowned king." "What about me?" Jack frowned. "You failed the first 2 tests," Crispin scoffed. "You'll never be king." Edmund sniggered. Jack frowned, gritted his teeth, and picked up his pen. There were all sorts of questions. There were maths questions, geography questions, and even one question asking the name of the kitchen boy. When all the tests were completed, the whole kingdom waited nervously for the results. "Edmund, you got 29 out of 30, said the king. Edmund glanced at Crispin. Nervously. Would it be enough to beat him? Crispin crossed his fingers, hoping that he'd guessed the kitchen boy's name correctly. "Crispin, you also got 29. The king cried. Crispin and Edmund stared at each other in shock. "It's a draw," they gasped. "No, it isn't," the king said. Jack scored full marks. Crispin and Edmund's jaws dropped open at exactly the same time. But the only question we didn't know was the name of the kitchen boy. They said, "You mean Fred?" Jack grinned. Edmund shrugged. "Who cares what his name is, he's only the kitchen boy." Jack frowned. "I care about everyone in the palace. I know all their names." "So it's a tie," huffed Crispin, folding his arms. "We've each won 1 test." "What now?" "It isn't a tie," said the king. "There is a clear winner." "It's me!" Edmund cried, happily. "I beat Sir Gallant and knocked the apple off the girl's head." "But you didn't shoot it off, like I did," Crispin argued. "And I disarmed Sir Gallant." "It must be me." "My sons, the tests were not to prove who was best at fighting or archery, but to find out who would be the best king," their father sighed. Crispin and Edmund frowned at each other. So who did you choose? They asked. The king smiled. Jack, he replied. Jack's brothers opened their mouths in shock. Jack, they cried together. Me? Gasped Jack. It's good to have strength, skill, and knowledge, their father said. But to be a good king, it is more important to be kind and wise, and to care about all the people in your kingdom, from the richest to the poorest. The king looked at Jack. My son, he said, you are kind, wise, and caring. You will be a great king. The king took off his crown and put it on Jack's head. Hooray! Cheered the crowd. Long live King Jack. Story order. Look at these 5 pictures and captions. Put the pictures in the right order to retell the story. 1. The king announces the results. 2. The king decides to set some tests. 3. King Jack becomes the new king. 4. The written test has lots of questions. 5. Jack loses the archery test.